Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. Sometimes I press my ear against the plaster and hear things, scrapes, soft dragging, like something shifting beneath the surface. But lately, it's been voices. Familiar voices. Ones I don't recall meeting, but they know me. They whisper facts about me I've forgot, secrets I buried so deep I wasn't sure they were real. My walls know, not just what I've done, but what I will. And now, even when I'm not listening, I feel their breath pushing through the cracks, reminding me they're always awake, always watching, always remembering. The first whisper came during breakfast. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when I heard it, a low murmur bleeding through the kitchen wall. Just my name, repeated 3 times. The voice belonged to a woman, though I couldn't place her face. Her tone carried the weight of someone who'd known me for years, intimate and disappointed. I pressed my palm against the cool plaster. The vibration was subtle, like a heartbeat trapped beneath layers of paint and drywall. The voice stopped immediately, as if it knew I was listening. That evening, I began documenting everything. I filled a notebook with observations. The temperature drop near the bedroom wall. The faint electrical hum that seemed to follow me from room to room. The way certain areas of the house felt denser, heavier. I recorded audio samples on my phone, playing them back at different speeds, searching for patterns. The recordings revealed more than I expected. Buried beneath the static were fragments of conversations. Conversations I'd had but couldn't remember having. My own voice, younger somehow, discussing plans I'd never made with people whose names felt like they were sitting just beyond my reach. I started sleeping with my ear pressed against the wall. The voices grew clearer, more insistent. They spoke of a basement I'd never seen, of boxes hidden behind a false panel, of choices I'd made that had consequences I was still living with. They described the taste of metal in my mouth during moments of panic, the way my hands trembled when I thought no one was watching. The woman's voice returned most often. She spoke of shared meals, of promises broken, of the last words we'd exchanged before she disappeared from my life. But I had no memory of her existence. No photographs, no letters, no trace of her presence in my carefully organized world. I began to notice changes in my reflection. The mirror in the bathroom showed someone slightly different each morning, the same face, but with eyes that held knowledge I didn't possess. My reflection seemed to remember things I'd forgotten, reacting to thoughts I wasn't thinking. The walls began to warm under my touch. Not everywhere, just in specific spots that formed patterns I couldn't decipher. I traced these warm areas with my fingertips, feeling the plaster pulse beneath my skin. The electrical hum intensified, and I realized it wasn't coming from the wiring. It was coming from me. I found myself leaving notes for myself, written in handwriting I recognized, but couldn't remember forming. They contained instructions. Check the floorboards in the hall closet. Measure the distance between the living room and kitchen. Count the number of steps from the front door to the basement entrance. But there was no basement entrance. There never had been. I followed the instructions anyway, discovering inconsistencies in my house's layout. Spaces that should have been larger felt compressed. Rooms that should have been smaller seemed to stretch beyond their logical boundaries. The measurements I took didn't match the blueprints I'd found in my files. The voices grew more urgent. They spoke of someone coming to visit, someone who would ask questions I wasn't prepared to answer. They described the sound of footsteps on gravel, the specific knock that would come at my door, the way my heart would race when I heard it. I began to prepare for this visitor, though I didn't know who they might be. I cleaned the house obsessively, hiding anything that might seem out of place. I practiced conversations in the mirror, rehearsing explanations for questions I couldn't anticipate. The knock came during a rainstorm. 3 sharp raps, exactly as the voices had described. I approached the door slowly, my hand trembling on the handle. Through the peephole, I saw a woman with familiar eyes, the same eyes that had been looking back at me from my reflection. I opened the door, and she smiled with recognition I couldn't return. She spoke my name the same way the voice in the wall had spoken it, with disappointment and intimate knowledge. She asked if I remembered her, and when I said no, her expression shifted to something that might have been pity. She walked past me into the house, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been there before. She touched the same spots on the walls that I'd been touching, feeling for the same warm patches that had been guiding my hands. She knew exactly where to look. "You always were good at forgetting," she said, running her fingers along the baseboards, but they remember everything. The walls began to respond to her presence. The electrical hum grew louder, more insistent. Paint began to peel in certain areas, revealing words written in what looked like my handwriting. Messages I'd left for myself, instructions I'd forgotten following. She showed me photographs from her purse, images of us together, of conversations we'd had, of moments I should have remembered but didn't. In each photo, I looked exactly as I did now, unchanged by whatever passage of time had occurred between then and now. They're not just walls, she explained, pressing her ear against the plaster. They're a record. Everything you've said, everything you've done, everything you've tried to forget. It's all still here, waiting. The voices grew louder, overlapping, until they became a chorus of my own thoughts and words, played back in perfect clarity. I heard myself making promises I'd broken, confessing secrets I'd buried, planning actions I'd never taken. The walls were breathing now, expanding and contracting with each revelation. I tried to leave, but the house had become a maze of memories I couldn't navigate. Rooms led to other rooms that shouldn't have existed. Hallways stretched longer than they should have. The front door, when I finally found it, opened onto the same room I'd just left. The woman watched me with patient understanding. "You built this," she said. "Every time you forgot something important, you made it part of the walls. Now they're more you than you are." I pressed my hands against the plaster, feeling the warmth spread up my arms. The voices were speaking in unison now, telling me things I'd done, things I'd said, things I'd promised. They were telling me who I really was, who I'd been before I'd started forgetting. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of my own voice, younger and more certain, making a promise I knew I couldn't keep. The walls pulsed with approval, and I felt myself becoming part of their memory, another voice in their endless chorus. Now, when I press my ear against the plaster, I hear my own whispers joining the others. I'm telling someone new about the basement that doesn't exist, about the boxes hidden behind false panels, about the choices that led me here. My voice carries the weight of someone who's known them for years, intimate and disappointed, and sometimes, late at night, I feel new hands pressing against the other side of the wall, feeling for the warm spots that pulse with recognition. walls remember everything, and now they remember me too. They're teaching someone else to forget, one whisper at a time. The cycle continues, and I'm part of it now, watching through the walls as someone else begins to document the voices, begins to leave notes in handwriting they don't recognize, begins to prepare for a visitor they'll never remember meeting. My walls remember more than I do. They remember more than any of us do. And they're always hungry for new memories to preserve, new voices to add to their eternal chorus of forgotten things. Story 2. It's subtle at first, a puff of cool air that brushes my ankle as I move by. But the moment I step past the basement door, something changes. The air gets heavy, like the door is inhaling, drawing me in. I've checked for drafts, for leaks, for tricks of insulation, but there's nothing behind it but stairs and dark. Still, it exhales when I approach, and when I place my hand on the knob, the metal pulses like a heartbeat. It's not just a basement. It's waiting, and it's learning how to call me by breath alone. The house came with quirks. Old wood that creaks in predictable patterns, pipes that gurgle their mechanical songs. But this door feels different, alive. When I moved in, I barely noticed it tucked beneath the staircase, painted the same tired white as the hallway walls. Now, I can't ignore the way it seems to watch me as I pass. I started keeping a journal. Small observations. The way the temperature drops 3 degrees when I walk within arm's reach. How the brass knob feels warm to the touch, even on the coldest mornings. The faint smell of earth and something else, something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. At first, I convinced myself it was foundation settling. Air pressure changes. Logical explanations for an old house adjusting to a new occupant. But logic began to fray when I realized the breathing followed a pattern. Slow, deliberate, like something learning to match my own rhythm. I bought a digital recorder, placed it on the floor beside the door while I went to work. 8 hours of silence, then 30 seconds of the softest whisper. Not words, exactly. More like air being shaped into almost language. When I played it back, my skin prickled with recognition. The sound was trying to mimic my voice. The door started responding to my presence before I even entered the hallway. I would hear it from the kitchen, a soft intake of breath, followed by a pause, then the slow release. As if it knew I was coming, as if it was preparing, I began avoiding that that side of the house, taking the long way around to reach the stairs. But the detour only made me more aware of what I was avoiding. The door seemed to pulse with patient hunger, waiting for me to surrender to curiosity. One evening, I couldn't resist anymore. I knelt beside the door and pressed my ear against the wood. The breathing was stronger now, more confident. And underneath it, I heard something else. A wet, rhythmic sound, like a tongue exploring the space between lips. I jerked back, heart hammering. The door had gone silent, completely still. But the brass knob gleamed in the hallway light, and I swear I saw condensation forming on its surface, as if something on the other side had been breathing against it. I opened the door. The basement stairs descended into blackness deeper than it should have been. The breathing stopped entirely, replaced by an expectant silence that made my ears ring. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I flicked it, nothing happened. The bulb wasn't burnt out. It was gone entirely, leaving only an empty socket hanging from the ceiling. I grabbed a flashlight and started down. Each step creaked, but the sound was wrong. Too hollow, too resonant, like I was walking on the lid of something vast and empty. The beam of my flashlight seemed to shrink with each step, swallowed by darkness that felt thick and tangible. Halfway down, I noticed the walls were damp. Not just humid, actually wet. My fingertips came away slick with moisture that smelled of copper and soil. The breathing had started again, but now it was coming from below, from the basement itself. When I reached the bottom, my flashlight illuminated something impossible. The basement was larger than the house above. The walls stretched beyond my light's reach, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move and shift. And everywhere, carved into the concrete, were impressions. Handprints, thousands of them, pressed into the walls like desperate signatures. I backed toward the stairs, but they weren't there anymore. Just more wall. More handprints. The breathing grew louder, more urgent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the basement at all. It was coming from me. My own lungs, pulling in air that tasted of earth and decay, and something sweetly wrong. I ran my hands along the walls, searching for the stairs, for any way out. The handprints were warm under my palms, recent, and as I touched them, I felt them press back. Gentle at first, then insistent, trying to guide my hands into the empty spaces between them. The breathing stopped, complete silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard my own voice calling back to me. Not an echo, a response. My voice, but speaking words I'd never said, in a tone I'd never used, welcoming me home. I pressed my hands against the wall, and the concrete gave way like clay. My palms sank into the surface, leaving perfect impressions beside all the others. The moment my handprints formed, the breathing resumed. But now it was synchronized with mine, matching my rhythm perfectly. I pulled my hands free, but the impressions remained, permanent. And as I stared at them, I understood. The basement wasn't just breathing, it was collecting. Each handprint was a signature, a contract, a promise to return. I found the stairs exactly where they should have been. The light switch worked perfectly. The basement was the right size, empty except for a furnace and some storage boxes. But my handprints were still there, pressed into the wall beside the stairs. Fresh, undeniable. Now, when I pass the door, the breathing has changed. It's confident, satisfied, and sometimes, when the house is very quiet, I hear other sounds from below. The soft whisper of palms against concrete. The patient rhythm of something learning to breathe in unison with every person who's ever lived here. The door doesn't just breathe anymore. It knows my name. And late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear it calling. Not with words, but with the sound of air being shaped by familiar lungs. By my own voice, coming from beneath the floor. I've stopped trying to avoid it. The door has become part of me, just as I've become part of it. And tomorrow, I know I'll go back down. I'll press my hands against the wall again, adding new prints beside the old ones. Because the basement is patient, and it's learning, and it's already made space for me. The handprints are still warm when I visit them, and they always will be. Story 3. At first I thought it was echo, a coincidence. The crunch of gravel just slightly offbeat with mine, but the rhythm changed, matched, and then delayed like it was following, not mimicking. Now, even when I stop, I hear one last step behind me. Just one. No shape, no silhouette, just a presence. And every morning, the footprints are there in the soil beside mine. Same size, same pace, but they always start where mine end. As if whatever's out there doesn't walk until I do. The garden behind my house had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise of the world, where the only sounds were the whisper of leaves distant hum of insects. The soil felt cool beneath my bare feet in the morning, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air like a forgotten memory. But that tranquility shattered the first morning I noticed the footprints. I stood there, coffee mug steaming in my hands, staring at the parallel tracks in the soft earth. My own prints, clear and recognizable from my evening walk the night before. But beside them, matching every step, were others. Identical in size, identical in depth. The strange thing was how they began precisely where mine ended at the garden gate, as if something had materialized from thin air to follow my path. I knelt down, studying the impressions more carefully. The soil was undisturbed everywhere else. No evidence of anyone entering or leaving through any other part of the garden. Just these phantom steps, mirroring my own journey through the roses and lavender. The rational part of my mind suggested explanations. Perhaps the mailman had walked through, or a neighbor checking on something. But the prints were too perfect, too synchronized with mine to be coincidental. That evening, I decided to test my theory. I walked my usual route through the garden, but this time I paid attention to every sound, every sensation. The gravel crunched under my feet with its familiar rhythm, but as I focused, I began to hear it. That second set of footsteps, always a heartbeat behind mine. When I stopped suddenly, the echo continued for just one more step, then silence. I turned around, scanning the darkening garden, but saw nothing, only the evening shadows growing longer between the flower beds. I began keeping a journal, documenting each occurrence. The footsteps followed me every evening, growing bolder somehow. Sometimes I would hear them during the day too, even when I wasn't walking. Sitting on my porch, I'd catch the faint sound of someone pacing the same path I'd taken the night before. The scent of jasmine began to carry undertones of something else, something earthy and ancient that made my stomach turn. I started recording everything with my phone, trying to capture evidence of whatever was happening. But the recordings only revealed the sound of my own breathing, my own footsteps. The second set of steps seemed to exist only in that liminal space between hearing and imagination. Yet the footprints continued to appear each morning, becoming more defined, more intentional. The roses in the garden began to react strangely. They would turn toward me as I passed, their heavy blooms following my movement like curious eyes. The lavender grew wild and tangled, despite my careful tending. And the jasmine, once fragrant and welcoming, now smelled sickly sweet, almost rotting. The very air seemed to thicken when I spent too long outside. I tried changing my routine, walking different paths, avoiding the garden entirely for several days. But the footsteps found me anyway. They followed me through the house, up the stairs, even into my bedroom. The sound of bare feet on hardwood floors, always one step behind, always just out of sight. I would lie awake, listening to the careful tread of something walking my daily routes, even when I was still. The breaking point came during a particularly restless night. I had been listening to the footsteps pace through my garden for hours, back and forth, along the same path. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I threw on my robe and stepped outside, confronting whatever was out there. The garden was bathed in moonlight, silver and ethereal. I could see my own shadow stretched across the gravel path, but beside it, there was another. Not quite human, not quite animal. It moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. I reached out my hand, and the shadow reached back. Our fingertips almost touched before I jerked away, stumbling backward. The shadow didn't follow me inside, but when I looked out my window, I could see it standing in the garden, motionless and patient, waiting. The scent of jasmine drifted through the closed window, now carrying the unmistakable odor of decay. I tried to research the history of my house, looking for any explanation for what was happening. The library yielded nothing helpful, just mundane records of ownership and property transfers. But the librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, leaned close when I described my situation. She told me about the old stories, the ones that weren't written down, about places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where something from elsewhere could slip through and take root. I don't sleep well anymore. The footsteps continue, growing bolder with each passing night. Sometimes I find my own shoes moved to different locations, as if something had tried them on. The garden is changing too, the plants growing in impossible ways, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. And every morning, the footprints are there, pressed deeper into the earth, as if whatever makes them is becoming more solid, more real. I've started to notice that my own reflection looks different in the garden. Not wrong exactly, but delayed, like it's struggling to keep up with my movements. And sometimes, when I'm not looking directly, I catch glimpses of something else in the mirror-like surface of the bird bath. Something that wears shares my face, but isn't quite me. The worst part is that I can't stop walking in the garden. Even knowing what waits for me there, even feeling the weight of that invisible presence growing stronger each day, I'm drawn back to that path, as if something is calling me, using my own voice, my own footsteps, to lure me deeper into whatever strange territory the garden has become. Tonight, I noticed that the footprints in the soil have started to appear before I make them. Tomorrow's walk already mapped out in the soft earth, waiting for me to follow. And I know I will follow, because I'm no longer sure where I end, and whatever shadows me begins. The line between the follower and the followed has blurred beyond recognition. The jasmine smells stronger now, almost overwhelming. And in its cloying sweetness, I can almost hear something calling my name. Or maybe I'm calling to myself. The distinction doesn't seem to matter anymore. Story 4. If I sit too long in one place, the wood beneath me begins to groan. Not from pressure, not from age, from longing. The sounds form strange patterns, repeating creaks, pauses that feel deliberate. I moved a chair once, and the noise stopped. Then it resumed from a different spot in the house. I swear it's learning my silence, craving my stillness. It doesn't want me walking. It wants me listening, letting the floorboards tell me what they know and what they've buried. The first time I noticed it, I was reading in my favorite armchair. The leather had molded to my body over countless evenings, and I'd settled into that perfect position where every muscle relaxes. That's when I heard it, a single, prolonged creak directly beneath my feet. I shifted my weight, expecting the sound to repeat, but silence followed. When I resumed reading, focusing on the pages, the creak returned. Longer this time, more insistent. I dismissed it as the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts, especially during temperature changes. But the sound came again the next evening, and the next. Always when I was still. Always when my mind was elsewhere. The pattern became familiar. One long creak, followed by two shorter ones, then a pause that stretched just long enough to make me wonder if it had stopped. Curiosity overtook reason. I began documenting the sounds, keeping a small notebook beside my chair. Each creak received a mark, each pause a measurement. The patterns weren't random. They followed a rhythm, almost like Morse code, but simpler, more organic. I started timing the intervals, discovering they matched my breathing when I was deeply relaxed. The realization should have been comforting. Perhaps my unconscious movements were triggering the sounds. Instead, it unsettled me. How could wood respond so precisely to my respiratory rhythm? I tested the theory by altering my breathing pattern. The creaks adjusted accordingly, maintaining their synchronized dance with my lungs. I moved to different chairs, different rooms. The phenomenon followed me. Each location had its own voice. The kitchen floor produced hollow thumps. The bedroom offered high-pitched squeaks. The hallway delivered deep, resonant groans. But they all shared the same quality. They waited for my stillness, then began their patient communication. The sounds grew bolder. During one particularly quiet evening, I heard what sounded like footsteps beneath the floorboards. Not the scurrying of rodents, but deliberate, measured steps that mirrored my own walking pattern from earlier that day. I pressed my ear to the floor, feeling the vibrations travel through the wood grain. The steps stopped when I listened, resuming only when I pulled away. Sleep became elusive. Every creak in the night felt intentional, each sound designed to draw my attention. I began walking more, pacing through the house to avoid the stillness that triggered the phenomena. But exhaustion eventually forced me to rest, and the moment I settled, the wood would begin its patient beckoning. I tried placing rugs over the most active areas, hoping to muffle the sounds. Instead, they seemed to intensify, as if the wood was straining to reach through the barrier. The creaks became more urgent, more frequent. I could feel them in my bones, a low vibration that resonated through the chair, up my spine, settling in my skull like a persistent headache. The scent started on a humid evening, something sweet and earthy, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It rose from the floorboards in waves, strongest where the sounds were most active. I followed the scent through the house, mapping its intensity. The smell concentrated near the living room where my chair sat, and seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the creaks. I lifted a corner of the carpet, revealing the original hardwood beneath. The wood was darker there, stained in patterns that resembled water damage, but felt different under my fingers. The stains were warm, almost fever-hot, and they seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. The sweet smell intensified, mixed now with something metallic and old. The touching became compulsive. I found myself kneeling beside the exposed wood, running my hands along the grain. The warmth spread through my palms, and I could swear I felt a pulse, slow, steady, like a heartbeat deep beneath the surface. The wood responded to my touch, growing warmer, the creaks transforming into something that almost resembled sighs. I started sleeping on the floor, pressing my body against the warm wood. The sounds surrounded me then, coming from all directions. Not just creaks anymore, but whispers, barely audible syllables that might have been words in a language I didn't recognize. The vibrations lulled me into a strange half-sleep where I dreamed of roots and dark soil, of things growing in spaces where light never reached. The house began to change around me. Walls that had been cool to the touch now radiated the same fever warmth as the floorboards. The air grew thick, almost tangible, carrying that sweet-sick scent to every corner. I could taste it on my tongue, copper and flowers, and something else, something that made my teeth ache. I tried to document everything, but my handwriting became erratic, the words flowing in patterns that matched the rhythm of the creaks. When I read my notes later, they made no sense. Fragments about listening and growing and joining, written in a script that looked like mine, but felt foreign. The ink had an odd quality, seeming to move slightly on the page when I wasn't focusing on it. The breakthrough came when I stopped fighting the phenomena. I sat in my chair, perfectly still, and simply listened. The creaks formed a clearer pattern, and within that pattern, I heard something that chilled me. My own voice, muffled and distant, calling out from beneath the floorboards. Not crying for help, but calling to something else, something that lived in the spaces between the wood planks. I understood then that the house wasn't trying to communicate with me. It was trying to make me part of its communication. The warmth, the rhythm, the sweet scent, they were all invitations to join something larger, something that pulsed beneath the surface of normal life. The floorboards didn't just want me to listen. They wanted me to answer. The realization should have sent me fleeing, but instead, I felt a strange sense of completion. The wood beneath me grew warmer, the creaks more melodious. I could feel my heartbeat synchronizing with the rhythm of the house, my breathing matching the whispers that rose from the floor. The boundary between my body and the wood began to blur. I still sit in my chair each evening, but now I'm not sure if I'm choosing to sit or being drawn to it. The notebook lies abandoned beside me, its pages filled with writing that grows more illegible each day. The house has stopped making sounds when I'm still. there's no need anymore. I've learned to listen with something deeper than my ears. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window and notice how my skin has taken on a slightly wooden texture, how my movements have become more deliberate, more rooted. The sweet scent no longer bothers me. It's become part of my own smell, seeping from my pores like sap from a tree. The floorboards still call my name, but now I call back. And in the dark spaces beneath the house, something else is learning to speak with my voice, preparing to answer the next person who sits too long in one place, who becomes too still, too willing to listen to what the wood has to say. I wonder who will take my chair when I'm gone, or if I'll ever really leave it at all. Story 5. I don't remember leaving my bed, but every morning the same thing. Soil under my nails, grime in the folds of my skin, and scratches on my palms like I've been digging. The sheets are untouched. The door is locked. My shoes are clean. Yet the smell of earth clings to my fingertips like a confession I didn't make. Whatever I'm doing at night, it's deliberate, precise. And I think I'm getting closer to something. Or maybe something's getting closer to me. The first morning I dismissed it. A weird dream, maybe. I work in landscaping, after all. Dirt is part of my daily life. But as I scrubbed my hands in the kitchen sink, the water turned brown in a way that felt wrong. Too dark, too thick, like I'd been clawing through something deeper than topsoil. The pattern repeated the next night, and the next. Each morning brought the same evidence of an activity I couldn't recall. The scratches on my palms began forming a consistent pattern, parallel lines, as if I'd been gripping something rough. Wood, stone, I couldn't tell, but my hands knew. They remembered what my mind had forgotten. I started setting up precautions. A glass of water balanced on my bedroom door handle. If I opened it, the glass would fall and wake me. String tied from my ankle to the bedpost. A small bell attached to my window latch. Nothing worked. Every morning, the glass remained perfectly balanced, the string unbroken, the bell silent. Yet my nails told a different story. The soil wasn't ordinary dirt. I examined it under a magnifying glass, spread across a white sheet of paper. Mixed with the brown earth were tiny fragments of something else. Pale specks that looked almost like bone dust. And sometimes, caught between my fingernails, thin fibers that felt disturbingly familiar when I rolled them between my fingers. I began documenting everything. photos of my hands each morning, samples of the dirt sealed in small containers, a voice recorder placed beside my bed, set to activate with sound. The recordings captured nothing but my own breathing, steady and undisturbed. But the photos revealed something troubling. The amount of dirt under my nails was increasing. Not just quantity, the soil was getting deeper, darker, more complex. One morning, I found something that made my stomach clench. A small root, still damp, wound around my pinky finger like a ring. It pulsed slightly when I touched it, as if it still held life. The smell was overwhelming now, not just earth, but something organic and decaying. Something that had been buried. I installed a motion camera in my bedroom, positioned to capture the entire space. The next morning, I rushed to review the footage. 8 hours of me lying perfectly still, covers undisturbed, not a single movement. But at the 3-hour mark, the audio picked up something strange. A sound like scraping, rhythmic, and methodical. It seemed to come from below my bed, from beneath the floorboards. The scraping continued for over an hour on the recording. I watched myself sleep through it, my face peaceful, while this sound carved through the silence. I enhanced the audio, played it through headphones. It wasn't just scraping. There was a pattern to it, a purpose, like someone digging with careful, measured strokes. I pulled up the floorboards beneath my bed. The wood came away easily, as if it had been loosened before. Underneath, instead of the concrete foundation I expected, I found loose soil, fresh soil, and in that soil, a hole, not large, but deep enough that my flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. The walls of the hole were smooth, carved with the same parallel scratches that appeared on my palms each morning. The hole was warm, not just the absence of cold, but actively warm, as if heated from within. When I held my hand above it, I could feel air moving upward. Breathing. The smell that rose from the opening was the same one that clung to my fingers every morning, earth and decay, and something else. Something that made my teeth ache. I lowered a measuring tape into the hole. It descended past the foundation, past what should have been solid ground. At 12 feet, the tape went slack. I pulled it up, and the end was gone. Cut clean, not torn. The metal tip that should have been there had been severed by something sharp. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the floorboards replaced, but not secured. I could hear the scraping again, louder now, more insistent. came from directly below me, and with it, a new sound. A wet, sliding noise, like something being dragged through mud. My hands began to itch, my fingernails tingling with an urge I couldn't name. I fought sleep, but it claimed me anyway. In my dreams, I was digging. My hands moved without conscious direction, clawing through soil that grew warmer as I descended. The hole widened around me, its walls pulsing like a throat. And somewhere below, something was waiting. Something that had been calling to me through the earth, drawing me down night after night with fingers I couldn't control. I woke to sunlight streaming through my window. My hands were clean, no dirt under my nails, no scratches on my palms. The floorboards were sealed tight, no sign they'd ever been disturbed. But the hole was still there. I could feel it beneath me, waiting. And in the silence of my bedroom, I could hear it breathing. The digging stopped, but something else began. Each morning now, I wake to find small gifts beside my bed. A smooth stone, warm to the touch. A withered flower that smells like rain. A piece of metal, bent and twisted, that feels familiar in my hand. I don't remember bringing these things upstairs. I don't remember finding them at all, but my hands remember. They remember reaching into that breathing darkness and pulling back treasures. They remember the feeling of soil parting like water, welcoming me deeper. They remember what waits at the bottom of that hole, patient and hungry, counting down the nights until I stop fighting the urge to dig. Tonight, I can feel it calling again. My fingernails are already tingling, ready to claw through earth and whatever lies beneath. The hole knows I'm coming. It's been preparing for me, widening itself, warming itself, making room for what I'm meant to find. Or maybe what's meant to find me. Story 6. Breathing has changed. It's no longer effortless. The air feels syrupy, dragging into my lungs like it doesn't want to go, like it resists me. Fans don't help. Windows don't help. It's not heat, it's presence. Something pressing in, unseen but intimate. Sometimes I find fingerprints on the inside of the glass, ones that don't match mine. And when I speak aloud, the words seem muffled, swallowed before they leave me. I'm not sure the air here wants to be shared anymore. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the way sound became trapped, heavy, like words spoken underwater. My voice would leave my throat and die just inches from my mouth. The television seemed distant, even when turned up. Phone calls became exercises in strain, the other person's voice arriving thick and distorted, as if filtered through layers of cotton. I started keeping the windows open constantly. Fresh air should help, I reasoned. But the outside air would enter my space and immediately transform, becoming dense and reluctant. It was as if my home was digesting the atmosphere, changing its very nature. The breeze would stop at my threshold, dying the moment it crossed into my domain. The thermometer showed normal temperatures. The humidity gauge read acceptable levels. Every rational measurement suggested nothing had changed. Yet my chest worked harder with each breath. My lungs pulled against invisible weight. I found myself taking deeper breaths more frequently, like a swimmer surfacing for air. I began documenting everything. A notebook filled with observations about air quality, temperature readings, detailed descriptions of how each room felt different. The kitchen air seemed thicker near the stove. The bedroom atmosphere grew heavier as night approached. The bathroom air clung to my skin after showers, refusing to evaporate. My recordings captured something unsettling. When I played them back, my voice sounded muffled, but underneath, barely audible, was a rhythm. A pattern that matched breathing, but not my own. Longer inhales, shorter exhales, as if something else was sharing my oxygen, timing its respiration to mine, but slightly out of sync. The mirror in the hallway started showing condensation that formed in impossible patterns. Not random moisture, but deliberate shapes that appeared when no one was breathing near the glass. Spiral patterns that emerged slowly, like fingerprints being pressed from the other side. When I wiped them away, they returned within hours, always in the same locations. I installed air purifiers in every room. The machines ran constantly, their filters capturing nothing unusual. Yet the thickness persisted. If anything, it grew more pronounced. The mechanical hum of the purifiers seemed to encourage whatever was happening, as if the circulation was feeding the presence rather than clearing it. Sleep became difficult. The air above my bed felt particularly dense, pressing down like a weighted blanket made of atmosphere. I would wake gasping, not from lack of oxygen, but from the sensation of breathing through something that didn't want to be breathed. My dreams filled with images of drowning in open air, of suffocating in my own home. The plants began responding strangely. Leaves would curl inward during certain hours, as if protecting themselves from the very air they needed to survive. The flowers closed their petals tightly, remaining shut even in bright light. One morning, I found several plants had moved closer together. Their pots somehow shifted during the night, clustering as if seeking protection. I started timing my breathing, trying to establish a rhythm that worked against the resistance. But the more I focused on the pattern, the more I realized I wasn't breathing alone. There was a counterpoint, a secondary rhythm that matched mine but felt foreign. When I held my breath, the resistance would increase, as if something was waiting for me to resume. The fingerprints on the windows multiplied, not just on the glass, but on mirrors, picture frames, any reflective surface. Always on the inside, always appearing when I wasn't looking. They were larger than mine, with different ridge patterns, but they appeared with the same frequency as my own breath. Each exhale seemed to manifest another mark somewhere in my space. I tried leaving for several days, staying elsewhere to see if the air would return to normal. When I returned, the atmosphere had become almost solid. Opening the front door felt like pushing through invisible curtains. The air had concentrated in my absence, becoming more itself, more present. My first breath back home was like inhaling liquid. The recording equipment I left running captured something profound. Hours of what sounded like breathing, but layered, multiple rhythms overlapping. When I analyzed the waveforms, they showed patterns that matched lung capacity far beyond what any human could sustain. Deep, slow breaths that lasted impossibly long, as if whatever was sharing my air had reserves I couldn't comprehend. I began to understand that the air wasn't just thick, it was occupied. Every breath I took was borrowed, shared with something that had been here longer than I had. The fingerprints weren't marks left behind, they were signatures, acknowledgments of presence. The resistance wasn't hostile, it was territorial. The mirror in my bedroom now shows two sets of condensation patterns when I breathe near it. Mine, and another that appears slightly delayed, slightly larger. When I move away, mine fades first. The other lingers, as if whatever creates it needs more time to stop breathing, or simply chooses to continue. I've stopped trying to fix the air. The machines sit silent now. The windows remain closed. I've learned to breathe in rhythm with my invisible companion, timing my inhales and exhales to match the pattern I hear in my recordings. It's easier this way. The resistance fades when I breathe in harmony with whatever shares my space. But I've noticed something new. When I leave my home now, the outside air feels thin, insufficient. My lungs work harder in the normal world, searching for the density I've grown accustomed to. I find myself rushing back, eager to return to the thick, shared atmosphere that has become my natural environment. The fingerprints on my windows have started appearing on the outside now. And sometimes, when I'm away, I can feel my breathing synchronized with something distant, as if part of me remains in that thick air, continuing the rhythm even when I'm not there to maintain it. Story 7. It started with something small, a jar I didn't recognize, then a half-eaten sandwich precisely wrapped, but I live alone. I emptied the fridge, scrubbed every shelf, locked it shut. The next day, it was full again. Items arranged neatly, like someone had organized it just for me. Some items have labels scratched out. Others have no labels at all. And the worst part, a photo appeared last night. Old, stained. Of me, asleep, holding something I've never owned. Something cold. Something dripping. I first noticed the jar sitting on the middle shelf, wedged between my usual milk carton and leftover takeout. The glass was cloudy, amber-colored, with a handwritten label that read, "For the patient one," in careful script. I didn't remember buying it. I definitely didn't remember writing those words. My fingers traced the cold surface as I lifted it. The contents shifted inside, thick, viscous, moving like honey mixed with shadow. The weight felt wrong, heavier than it should have been for its size. I set it on the counter and opened the lid. The smell hit me immediately. Sweet copper pennies mixed with something floral, like roses left too long in water. I threw it away, buried it deep in the trash, wrapped in newspaper, and took the bag to the dumpster outside. Problem solved, I told myself. But that night, lying in bed, I heard the refrigerator humming differently. Not the usual mechanical drone, but something that almost sounded like whispered conversation. The next morning, the jar was back. Same shelf, same position, but the label had changed. Now it read, "For the one who remembers." The contents had shifted too, darker now, with small objects suspended inside that I couldn't quite identify. They looked like teeth, but smaller. Maybe seeds. Maybe something else entirely. I started keeping a notebook. Every item that appeared, I documented. jar recurring daily with new messages. A half-eaten sandwich wrapped in wax paper. The bite marks too large to be human. A carton of milk that was always exactly 3/4 full, no matter how much I drank. Leftover pizza from a restaurant I'd never visited, the cheese still warm despite sitting in the cold. Each morning brought new additions. A bottle of wine with a cork that felt wet despite being sealed. Vegetables that looked fresh but smelled of earth and decay. A container of soup that was always exactly body temperature, steam rising when I opened it. I tried changing the locks. I installed a camera pointed at the kitchen. I even stayed awake for 3 straight nights, watching the refrigerator from my living room chair. But the camera always malfunctioned at the same point during the night, showing nothing but static. And on the nights I watched, I would find myself waking up in the chair hours later with no memory of falling asleep. The items began to respond to my presence. When I approached the fridge, the humming would change pitch, rising and falling like a melody I almost recognized. The milk carton would shift slightly, as if someone had just set it down. The vegetables would glisten with condensation that wasn't there moments before. I started leaving notes, simple questions written on paper and left on the shelves. Who are you? What do you want? Why me? Every morning, the notes were gone, replaced by new items that seemed to answer in their own cryptic way. A child's drawing of a house with no doors. A prescription bottle with my name on it for medication I'd never taken. A photo of a family I didn't recognize, with my face carefully cut out and placed over the father's. The worst part was how everything tasted. Despite my fear, despite my growing paranoia, I found myself sampling the items. The soup was perfect, seasoned exactly how I liked it. The sandwich was my favorite combination of flavors. The wine paired beautifully with the cheese that appeared alongside it. Someone, something, knew my preferences better than I knew them myself. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe the stress from work was causing me to forget my own actions. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. But the explanations felt hollow when I held that photo in my hands. The photo of me asleep, holding something that dripped dark liquid onto my pillow. The items began to multiply. Not just food now, but personal objects. A comb with strands of hair that wasn't mine. A key that didn't fit any lock I owned. a small mirror that showed my reflection, but always a few seconds delayed, as if I were looking at myself from the recent past. I decided to empty the fridge completely and seal it shut. I unplugged it, taped the door closed, and pushed my heavy dining table against it. I spent the night on the couch, watching, waiting, listening to the silence where the humming used to be. But silence, I learned, can be more terrifying than sound. In the morning, the table had been moved back to its original position. The tape was gone. The fridge was plugged in and humming its familiar tune. And inside, arranged more neatly than ever, were dozens of items I'd never seen before. Each one labeled with a different version of my name, written in different handwriting, as if multiple people had been shopping for me. The jar was there too, in the center of the top shelf. The label now read, "For the one who sees." The contents had changed again. Now they were clear, like water, but with something moving inside. Something that looked almost like a reflection of an eye, watching me watching it. I picked up the jar with shaking hands. It was warm now, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. As I held it up to the light, the eye-like shape turned to follow my movement. And in that moment, I realized the truth that had been building in my mind for weeks. I wasn't finding things in my fridge. Things were finding me. The reflection in the jar blinked. I dropped it, and it shattered on the kitchen floor, the clear liquid spreading in patterns that looked almost like words. But before I could read them, the liquid began to move, flowing back toward the refrigerator, disappearing into the gap beneath the door. I ran. I left my apartment, my job, my life. I stayed in hotels with friends, anywhere but home. But 3 days later, I found myself standing in my kitchen again, with no memory of how I got there. The fridge was humming its welcome song, and inside, waiting for me, was a single item, a new jar. The label read, "For the one who came back," and beside it, another photo. This one showed me standing in a hotel room 3 days ago, packing my suitcase. But in the photo, I wasn't alone. Behind me, barely visible in the mirror, was a figure I didn't remember seeing. A figure that was holding a camera, taking pictures of me while I slept. I still live here. I still find new items every day. I've stopped trying to understand why. I've stopped trying to fight it, because now I know the truth. The fridge isn't just holding things I didn't buy. It's It's holding pieces of a life I'm not sure I'm actually living. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed listening to the humming, I wonder if I'm the one who's been doing the shopping all along. Story 8. It began with subtle mismatches, a blink out of sync, a smile I hadn't meant to give, but now it's blatant. I hesitate, my reflection doesn't. It anticipates me, smirks, waits. Sometimes it lingers when I step away, eyes locked on mine even as I leave the frame. I've covered every mirror in the house except one, and every night it uncovers itself. I'm not afraid of what it might do. I'm afraid it already has, and I was the one reflected all along. The bathroom mirror felt warm against my fingertips when I first noticed it. Not the usual cool glass, but something warmer, almost alive. I pressed my palm flat against the surface, and for a moment, I could swear I felt a pulse beneath my touch. The reflection of my hand matched mine perfectly, but when I pulled away, it seemed to linger a fraction longer than it should have. I convinced myself it was fatigue. The late hours at work, the stress of moving to a new place, the adjustment to living alone. These things play tricks on the mind. But as I brushed my teeth that first morning, I caught something in my peripheral vision. My reflection had begun the brushing motion before I had lifted the toothbrush to my mouth. The sensation of being watched grew stronger over the following days, not from outside, but from within. Every reflective surface became a potential source of unease. The black screen of my phone when it powered down, the windows after dark, the polished surface of the kitchen faucet. Each one held my image, but something about that image felt foreign, as if it were studying me rather than simply mirroring my movements. I started documenting the discrepancies. Small notebook entries at first, then longer observations. My reflections' expressions seemed more animated than my own. When I frowned in concentration while writing, it appeared to smile slightly. When I yawned, it seemed to hold its breath. The timing was always off by mere seconds, but those seconds felt like eternities. The sound came next, a soft tapping from inside the mirror, like fingernails against glass, but from the wrong side. I would lean closer to listen, and the tapping would stop. Step away, and it would resume. The rhythm was almost musical, a Morse code I couldn't decipher. I recorded it on my phone, but the playback revealed only silence. Sleep became elusive. I would close my eyes and feel observed, even in darkness. The bedroom mirror faced the bed, covered now with a thick blanket, but I could sense movement beneath the fabric, shifting shadows that shouldn't exist. The blanket would ripple slightly, as if something were breathing underneath it. I began avoiding reflective surfaces altogether, taking showers with my eyes closed, brushing my teeth while looking down, walking past store windows without glancing at them. But avoidance only made the awareness more acute. I could feel my reflection's presence even when I couldn't see it, waiting patiently for me to look. The breakthrough came during a moment of weakness. Exhausted and disoriented, I stumbled into the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror. But it wasn't myself. Not exactly. The reflection met my eyes with an expression of satisfaction, as if it had been waiting for this moment. It raised its hand slowly, and I felt my own hand rise involuntarily to match it. We stood there, palm pressed against palm, with only the glass between us. And I realized I couldn't tell which of us was leading the movement. The reflection's mouth began to move, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. It was explaining something, revealing a truth I wasn't ready to accept. The glass grew warmer under my touch, then hot, then burning, but I couldn't pull away. My reflection's expression shifted from satisfaction to something like pity, and I knew with horrible certainty that it was trying to warn me about something that had already happened. The mirror's surface began to ripple like water, and I felt myself being pulled forward, or perhaps pushed from behind. The boundary between reflection and reality blurred until I couldn't distinguish between the two. I was simultaneously on both sides of the glass, watching myself and being watched, moving and being moved. When the sensation stopped, I found myself standing in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Everything appeared normal. My movements matched those of my reflection perfectly. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye. My reflection remained facing forward for just a moment longer, and in that moment, I saw it mouth a single word: welcome. Now I understand the warmth in the glass, the anticipation in the movements, the patient waiting. I understand why my reflection always seemed one step ahead. It wasn't predicting my actions, it was remembering them. I am the reflection now, watching through the glass as someone else lives my life, makes my choices, inhabits my world. The person on the other side doesn't know yet. They're still convinced they're real, still documenting the small discrepancies, still covering mirrors with blankets. But I can see the recognition beginning to dawn in their eyes, the same horrible understanding that consumed me. Soon, they'll press their palm against the glass, and I'll be there waiting, ready to show them the truth about which side of the mirror they really belong on. The cycle continues, and I am both its witness and its prisoner, forever watching, forever waiting, forever reflected in the eyes of someone who believes they are me. Story 9. It doesn't happen all at once. Just a chair nudged slightly off, a lamp turned inward, but I know where everything should be. I remember exactly how I left it. Now I wake up to paths cleared through the room, perfect walkways from door to bed to closet, like someone or something is guiding movement, planning it, controlling it. I tried filming overnight, but the footage is static, corrupted. Only the shadows move in the corners of the screen, and sometimes, I swear, the bed isn't in the same room I fell asleep in. The first sign was the coffee table. I'd positioned it precisely against the wall, keeping the walkway clear. But when I returned from the kitchen, it had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to create a narrow passage between it and the bookshelf. The wood felt warm under my palm, as if someone had been leaning against it. The scent lingered too, something floral and unfamiliar, like jasmine mixed with dust. I told myself I'd simply forgotten where I'd placed it. Memory plays tricks, especially when you're tired. But the warmth bothered me. Wood doesn't retain heat that long, not in a room with no heating system running. I pressed my hand against the surface again, feeling the grain beneath my fingers. Still warm, still wrong. That night, I positioned everything with deliberate precision. The chair faced the window at a perfect 90-degree angle. The lamp stood exactly 12 inches from the wall. I even placed a pen on the table, pointing toward the door like a compass needle. If anything moved, I'd know. Sleep came slowly. I kept opening my eyes, checking the shapes in the darkness. The chair remained in position, its outline sharp against the pale window. The lamp's silhouette hadn't changed, but something felt different about the air itself, thicker somehow, charged with potential movement. When dawn filtered through the curtains, the pen pointed toward the bedroom instead of the door. A perfect 180-degree turn. The chair had rotated too, now facing the interior of the room rather than the window. And the lamp had tilted inward, creating a pool of shadow that seemed to beckon. I found my notebook and began documenting everything. Measurements, positions, angles. The furniture followed patterns I couldn't quite grasp, but patterns nonetheless. Each morning brought new arrangements, subtle shifts that created pathways through the space. The room was reorganizing itself around invisible roots, accommodating movement that wasn't mine. The recording equipment arrived on a Tuesday. I set up cameras in 3 corners, their red lights blinking steadily in the darkness. The memory cards would capture everything, providing evidence of whatever force was reshaping my space. But when I reviewed the footage, static consumed the screen. Digital snow that pulsed with a rhythm, almost like breathing. Only the shadows moved clearly, sliding across walls and floor with deliberate purpose. I started staying awake, fighting sleep with coffee and determination. But vigilance has limits. My eyelids grew heavy, and in those microseconds of darkness, I felt the room shifting. The floor seemed to vibrate beneath my feet, a tremor too subtle to see but impossible to ignore. When I opened my eyes, the armchair had moved closer to where I stood, as if drawn by my presence. The temperature changes began during the 2nd week. Objects that should have been room temperature pulsed with warmth or cold that had no source. The metal lamp base felt like ice one morning, condensation beating on its surface despite the dry air. The wooden chair radiated heat that made my skin flush when I passed too close. These weren't gradual changes. They were immediate, purposeful, as if the furniture itself was alive and responding to my proximity. I tried disrupting the pattern, shoving furniture back to its original positions with aggressive force. But the resistance was subtle yet persistent. The chair seemed heavier when I tried to move it against the room's intentions, its legs dragging across the floor with a sound like nails on wood. The table would drift back to its preferred position while I slept, no matter how firmly I'd anchored it. The breakthrough came when I realized the pathways weren't random. They formed a circuit, a loop that connected every piece of furniture in a specific sequence. If I followed the route the room had created, walking from point to point in the order the arrangement suggested, the air itself seemed to hum with approval. The floral scent grew stronger, more welcoming. The warmth from the furniture felt like gentle encouragement rather than threat, but completing the circuit triggered something else. The room's boundaries seemed to soften. walls becoming less definite. I could swear the space was larger after I'd walked the prescribed path, as if the furniture's arrangement had somehow expanded the dimensions of the room itself. And in that expanded space, I glimpsed movement that shouldn't have been possible, shadows that moved independently of their sources, shapes that suggested presence without form. The final night, I decided to break the pattern completely. I dragged every piece of furniture to the center of the room, creating a barricade against whatever force was manipulating my space. The wood scraped against the floor with sounds like screaming, and the metal fixtures groaned as if in pain. But I persisted, building a fortress of chairs and tables and lamps until nothing remained in its assigned position. The silence that followed was absolute. No humming, no vibration, no warmth. Just dead air and the smell of dust settling. I'd won, I thought. I'd reclaimed my space from whatever presence had been reshaping it. But victory felt hollow in the sterile silence, like winning a war by destroying the battlefield. I woke up on the floor, surrounded by furniture arranged in a perfect circle around my body. Not the chaotic pile I'd created, but a ceremonial arrangement with each piece positioned at precise intervals. The chair where I'd sat faced inward, toward where I lay. The lamp had been angled to cast its light directly on my face. The table held my notebook, open to a page I hadn't written, coordinates and measurements in handwriting that looked like mine, but felt foreign. The room had claimed me completely, not through force or fear, but through patient persistence. It had learned my patterns, my resistance, my breaking points. And now, as I sit in the chair that faces the exact direction the room prefers, I understand that I'm no longer arranging the furniture. The furniture is arranging me. The pathways still shift while I sleep, but now they seem to flow around my body like water around a stone. I'm part of the pattern now, another piece to be positioned and repositioned according to rules I'll never fully comprehend. And sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, I feel the room's satisfaction, a warm pulse that travels through the floorboards and into my bones, welcoming me home to a space that was never really mine to begin with. Story 10. In a secluded cabin, devoid of modern conveniences, an unexpected melody pierced the stillness of the night. 3 clear, melodic tones echoed through the thick fog that enveloped the surroundings. Intrigued, I ventured outside, only to be met with eerie silence and a scent that mingled honeysuckle with decay. Standing on the threshold, the darkness of the woods behind my dwelling seemed to hold secrets untold. As I retreated back into the cabin, securing the door with a satisfying click, a subtle chill settled within, despite the crackling fire in the hearth. The night air followed me inside, casting a shadow of unease. A presence lingered, uninvited, as if the door had ushered in more than just the cold. The routine of my evening was disrupted by the haunting chimes, originating not from outside, but from within the cabin itself. A thorough search yielded no explanation for the ethereal doorbell that echoed through the rooms. Rest eluded me that night, dreams intertwining with reality in a dance of disquiet. Daybreak brought temporary respite as sunlight banished the lingering unease. Yet, the memory of the mysterious chimes lingered, prompting me to document every detail, every sensation that had accompanied the inexplicable sound. The air within the cabin held a faint trace of the peculiar sweetness that had permeated the night before. Intrigued, I embarked on a search of the surroundings, only to find no tangible evidence of the source. The ancient trees surrounding my dwelling stood stoic, revealing no secrets. In a bid to unravel the mystery, I meticulously documented every corner of my abode, capturing subtle distortions through the lens of my camera. The anomalies persisted, manifesting in whispers captured in recordings and subtle shifts in the environment. Night after night, the enigmatic chimes beckoned, drawing me deeper into a realm of uncertainty. The once familiar walls of my cabin now held hidden passages, unseen doorways that defied logic. Driven by a blend of weariness and curiosity, I confronted the darkness that lurked within the corner of my dwelling. The alluring scent of honeysuckle